morning, everyone. Wish you all a happy new year to begin with. And thank you for taking time out to join the webinar DevOps Predictions for 2021. First of all, I'd like to welcome our panelists, Neil Daswani and Tracy Ragan, who we are fortunate to have with us at this webinar. They are industry stalwarts in the DevOps, DevSecOps, and security space. Neil is a co-director of the Stanford Advanced Security Program, and he's also a former CISO, has worked at several companies, Symantec, Twitter, Google, and others. I've had the fortune of knowing Neil for a long time. And he's also coming up with an exciting book, which we'll hear about in the course of this discussion. And Tracy, who's the co-founder and CEO of DeployHub, and also a DevOps visionary as well. She's amongst the top 100 DevOps visionaries and a great women in tech leader. I'm going to hand it off to them for a quick introduction about themselves before we dive into the topic today. So Tracy, how about we start with you for a quick intro, then followed by Neil, and then I'll kick off the topic.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chandra. And for pointing out that I did get added to the list of 100 top visionaries in DevOps, which is a pretty exciting thing. I've been in this space literally my entire career. I have been working on what used to be called ALM. I am passionate about configuration management. I am super excited about microservices. I am not new to open source. I was on the Eclipse Foundation and was actually one of the founding members of the Eclipse Foundation. I am on the board of the CD Foundation and have helped drive the growth of that organization, which is under the Linux Foundation. And I have an open source product that I have released to the Linux Foundation called Ortelius, that DeployHub's core is based on, and it is all about managing microservices and doing what I like to call automated configuration management.
Impressive. Thank you, Tracy. Neil?
Great. Thank you for the initial introduction, Chandra. I'm Neil Daswani. I'm co-director of Stanford's Advanced Security Program. We at the program have focused on bringing more people into the security field, as well as for those people that are in the security field, helping them advance their careers. I have, as Chandra mentioned, I've served in a whole variety of roles spanning research, development, management, leadership, teaching. Started my career at Google, post finishing a PhD at Stanford. Then went off and started co-founded a company by the name of Daswani that Google Ventures funded. We got acquired by Twitter in an early exit. And then after my time at Twitter, I joined LifeLock as their chief information security officer. We got acquired by Symantec, which is how I met Chandra, and I spent some time at Symantec helping with integration. As Chandra mentioned, I am working on my next book. So near the end of February, beginning of March, my next book entitled Big Breaches, Cybersecurity Lessons for Everyone, is going to hit the market. The first half of the book talks about some of the biggest breaches to date and the root causes of them. One of those root causes is software vulnerabilities. And I look forward to chatting about what we can do in the DevOps world and in our DevOps cycle to reduce that risk. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you, Neil. I just wanted to also quickly introduce myself. I'm Chandra Ranganathan, co-founder and CEO of Opsera, along with Kumar Chivukula, who's here as well with us in the participating in the webinar. Kumar, shout out to you. Excited to work with him, and we have worked together at Symantec in the past, and we've also been in companies like Uber and Adobe. So I'd like to kick off this discussion with Tracy to start off with. So Tracy, we are seeing an increased adoption of multi-cloud, increased migration to multi-cloud. And because of that, we're also seeing an adoption in new technologies, right? Microservices, containers, serverless, infrastructure as code. And companies are, in a way, almost forced to go to multi-cloud, given it's accelerated by COVID. There's remote work is kind of here to stay in some shape or form. And this also drives re-engineering of workloads to become cloud native, right? So how do you see microservices playing in the DevOps ecosystem, and what are your perspectives on this movement to multi-cloud? So we'd love to hear from you.
So I think first we have to look at, I like figures and facts, and what's driving this change and where we're at. The CNCF does an annual survey, which is super useful for really defining where people are at in terms of uses of containers, and as soon as you start thinking containerized, everything else kind of falls into place. And according to the CNCF, the use of containers, 92% of the respondents indicated that they actually use containers in production, and that's up 84% from last year and 300% since 2016. And when you start using containers, you start thinking about a way to orchestrate those containers, and that kind of takes you to a Kubernetes architecture. And according to them, they say that 83% of their respondents are now using Kubernetes in a production environment, which is up 78% from last year. So we are really seeing a tidal wave of architectural change in how we deliver software. And yes, because we have this tidal wave of change, and it's really is disruptive. At the core of microservices, and I know this is going to lead to some of the security discussions. If you think about what we're doing in a microservice environment, in the old way, in monolithic, we took a step that we called continuous integration, CI. You update source code, you immediately check it out, and you compile it, which meant that configuration management was done at the very beginning of the CI step, at the very beginning of the CD pipeline. And that's because we created a static application. We took libraries and we statically linked them into the binary, whether it be a jar file, a WAR file, or a DLL, or any kind of a binary we were pushing out. We created a static application, and the linking was done static, and it was done carefully, or it should have been done carefully, at the CI step. With microservices, that link step, that very careful link step that some smart person in the corner sat and figured out what libraries needed to go into the object, now is done at runtime. So we're shifting CI. What we used to do at CI is changing. We disrupt the compile and link process. Most microservices are maybe 300 lines of code in Python, which isn't even compiled. We do a CI step, but that's creating an image. And we might do some scanning to pull down, we might use something like an Artifactory or something of that sort to do code scanning to make sure that we have all the libraries that are appropriate for that particular container. But the linking of the application then is done loosely, and it's done via APIs. So this changes the way we see the world in a pretty big way. Now, the reason why we see these hybrid clouds showing up has a lot to do with how we're beginning to approach microservices in Kubernetes. And what I see is that companies have a private cloud in production, but in order to save money and to be a little more agile in development and testing, they use public clouds, which means that the delivery process must be able to span different clusters, and sometimes managed by different companies. They could be using AWS for development, and they have their full, Kubernetes cluster in production that they're supporting. So the continuous delivery model, the CI process is disrupted pretty drastically. The continuous delivery model has to address new challenges, and the use of hybrid clouds, I think, will only expand from where we see private versus public, because I believe that teams will say, well, I want to use AWS, and I want to use Google, and I want to use Azure. And companies need to be able to be flexible in supporting these different clouds and these different hybrid patterns.
Great, awesome. And we'll cover more of that in terms of how software delivery is done across multi-cloud as we go through this discussion. I couldn't help but notice that the moment you said microservices, your doggy woke up. I don't know, maybe you like microservices so much, or you're just scared of microservices. So
yeah, I say it so often, I think he thinks it's his name.
So that takes us to security around microservices, right? As you alluded to briefly, we've all seen tremendous use of microservices. Where I've worked before, in places like Uber, we've had thousands of microservices, and it's not uncommon for companies to have hundreds, if not thousands, of microservices for workflows across software delivery process, running applications. So Neil, what are your insights and considerations around security when it comes to microservices? And maybe you can take this opportunity to also tell us a little bit more about your book.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So first of all, let me mention that I'm thrilled to see that 69% of the attendees are positive and optimistic about 2021. I am as well. I'm hoping that 2021 will be a year for recovery along a whole bunch of fronts, including recovery for the pandemic and recovery for cybersecurity. I think that at the end of December, the SolarWinds hack was announced. I think we have a lot of challenges to address in the field. And that's kind of one of the reasons, I decided to get together with Moody El-Bayati to co-author and write this upcoming book on big breaches. In the first half of the book, one of the things that we do is we go through the past 7 years, going back to 2013, and we cover the histories and the stories of some of the biggest breaches that have taken place, starting with the Target breach, the JP Morgan Chase breach, the Yahoo breaches, the OPM breaches, Facebook's breaches, the cloud security breach at Capital One from 2019. And what we found in all these mega breaches, as well as the 9,000 plus reported breaches that have taken place, is that there's really 6 technical root causes that are responsible for the majority of them. And those are some of what you'd expect, but some of what you might not. So phishing, malware, software vulnerabilities, third-party compromise and abuse, unencrypted data, and inadvertent employee mistakes. And so if we look at those, if we look at, for instance, the SolarWinds hack that took place just this past December, many people compared it to a digital harbor, but a digital Pearl Harbor, but it's really not as big of a surprise because it's a third-party compromise. There have been many of those. Coming to microservices, and by the way, in the book, we had to, it was a challenge to just choose some of the biggest breaches, but there have been some very relevant microservice-related breaches in the past as well. So for instance, if we go back to the 2013, 2014 era, Snap and Snapchat, and this was before they hired a CISO, this is before they built out a security team, they had a vulnerability where pretty much, their mobile app was using a bunch of microservice APIs on the back end, and there was no authentication for those APIs. So you cannot, one rookie mistake is to assume that it's only going to be your mobile app that's going to call the various microservices that power it. So rookie mistake number one that you should not make is make sure that all of your microservices support authentication and that you authenticate the client coming in, because once you make a microservice available to the internet, anybody on the internet can call it. Unauthenticated APIs are just one type of software vulnerability, one of the 6 key root causes that I had mentioned. My one prediction for 2021 is that I'm hoping that things will get better. But from all these breaches that we've seen, one thing that we know is that the future will be different from the past. But there's a famous saying that the future, while it might be different, it might rhyme with the past. So I think we should continue to focus on the basics, make sure we have authentication for all of our microservices, and there's many other things that we can do in the pipeline as well. I look forward to chatting more about how we can shift security left. But those are just some initial thoughts.
Awesome, great insights, Neil. So we'll talk about shift left, and I'll come back to you on that one. So Tracy, coming back to you. So we spoke about multi-cloud. Developers, DevOps engineers across multiple teams in enterprises, they want choice, right? They want choice of tools, driven by different use cases, driven, in order to innovate. In many cases, companies come up with their own proprietary CI/CD tooling. So how do you, and in most cases, they also want to use multi-cloud. For certain use cases, as you said, there's AWS needed, Azure, their own cloud. So orchestrating different tools in a CI/CD ecosystem across multi-cloud, across multiple steps, is not very easy. It's difficult for companies to do it yourself. There is a demand skill gap. And of course, there are some black box solutions out there. The black box solutions don't necessarily address flexibility and choice of being able to orchestrate all of these tools. So we are seeing platform approaches or self-service based approaches for orchestrating software delivery in such an ecosystem. Would love to hear more about your thoughts on how can you orchestrate DevOps in a platformized or self-service manner to address these use cases, especially across multiple teams in enterprises who all face the same challenges.
So if anybody's ever listened to me talk on this, they'll know that I often talk about two things: imperative versus declarative. Event-driven. We in the past, if we think about how we got to where we are today in the CI/CD discussion, we've done everything in a very static way. We declared an imperative of workflow. We define all of the steps that a application must go through. And if you ever talk to a large organization, what they will tell you is that they want that workflow to be the same for every single application. And in order to do that, they look at the application that has the most, for example, security problems, or that's the most critical, and they put that through the most stringent pipeline possible, which means every application has to go through a pretty stringent pipeline. Which was okay when we were doing monolithic, and we got excited because we did a deployment every week. And remember when we started this 10 years ago, we were doing deployments every 3 months and sometimes every 6 months, which, as I'm sure Neil will talk about in his book, what is part of the problem of the, some of these breaches is that they knew that there were security vulnerabilities at a lower level, but it took them 6 months to get the change out. That has to stop. And most of that is because of this this imperative kind of a pipeline. That it will go away. That is just going to go. There's just no other way to do it, because with microservices, as I often explain, not all microservices are equal. Some microservices have higher risk values. Some microservices are just a small change to a front end. We need to be able to deliver business agility, which means that a microservice that's just changing a front end may not have to go through so much effort as a microservice that has a high risk value and a big blast radius, which is the reason why a declarative pipeline and more event-driven pipelines are becoming more popular. And that will be a trend we will see in moving forward. The days of creating a standard pipeline and a kind of a workflow script that everybody has to pursue is just going to go away. It's not sustainable for what I like to call DevOps at scale. If we're going to be deploying microservices all day long, we have to put them through a pipeline that's appropriate. And how we do that is now moving away from these imperative pipelines into more declarative pipelines. And the idea of events and event-driven pipelines is core and critical to this conversation.
Great, awesome feedback and insights, Tracy. So we've also seen from our experience that these declarative event-driven pipelines are needed for so many different use cases where release automation is necessary in enterprises, in software engineering for core product development, infrastructure engineering for standing up infrastructure, and also you see it a lot on the IT side, because more and more IT teams are adopting SaaS, and when they adopt SaaS, there is a lot of customization on the SaaS applications that need release automation. So it's a similar concept, similar pain points that it pervades so many parts of the organization where declarative and event-driven are so relevant.
And not every team needs to use the same tools.
Exactly. Right, and they all have their choice of tools as well, right?
They should have their choice of tools. There should be basic guidelines. We need the guardrails. I used to talk about a compliance scorecard, and to move away from the idea of tools, but what do you want to achieve in the continuous delivery pipeline? What are the compliance levels that you want these teams to achieve? Should they be able to produce before they roll out a full bill of material report so that they can confidently say what is now inside that binary? Today, we need to be able to say, what blast radius does this microservice create? Who are we going to impact before we deploy it? You have to know before you go. And that is super critical, because if you're an application team and you're consuming a microservice, when that new microservice gets pushed out to Kubernetes in cluster, you're immediately going to consume it, even though you never knew anything was going to change in your application. But you, in essence, have a new application version. You probably didn't test it, and you need to be able to have that kind of visibility into what's changing in these clusters. I like to call them Death Stars. We need to be able to version the Death Star, and we need to be able to understand everything about that Death Star before we deploy to it.
Awesome.
And in a lot of ways, security is baked into that, because as Neil points out, if there's no authentication on a microservice, should your team be using it? Those are the kinds of things that we need to be able to see as part of the pipeline process.
Great, thank you, Tracy. So I'd like to shift into shift left, no pun intended. Neil, I'd like to come back to shift left. So when you are automating DevOps pipelines, getting it to no code, declarative, and spanning so many tools, so many steps, so many clouds, it's become more and more imperative to integrate security and quality into those pipelines dynamically, right, and proactively, and not have them as an afterthought of, I'll worry about it when I'm deploying it or post-deployment. So how do you see shift left playing a role in general software delivery, automated pipelines, DevOps orchestration? What are some of the considerations from your perspective?
Yeah, I'd be happy to chat about shift left. And before I do that, if you wouldn't mind, I just wanted to further emphasize a couple things that Tracy mentioned and alluded to. One of the things that she mentioned is a bill of software materials. What is going into your microservices? What's going into your software? And one of the reasons that I wanted to reemphasize that is if we look at the recent SolarWinds hack, the reason that the hack was able to occur is because the attackers were able to tamper with what went into the code update as it was getting built, right? And I think across the industry, I mentioned that third-party compromises is a major cause of breaches. One of the challenges that we have with supply chain third-party compromises is that we need to get a better understanding of what is coming in all of the software that we're using or that we're calling out to as a microservice. So I think that, when you can assemble your build pipelines such that once something gets compiled, you really can understand what is in it, that's just going to be more important going forward. The second thing that I wanted to further emphasize that Tracy mentioned was the importance of using declarative technologies. And to just kind of review what that means. So when you use a declarative technology, you tell your compilers and other tools what you want to achieve, but you don't tell them how to achieve it. And if we just think back to the world of databases from, say, 20 years ago, when people had to build their own data structures to store data, it would take a lot of work and there would be a lot of errors. But when SQL was created, the structured query language, it basically allowed developers to specify what data they wanted without having to specify how to get at that data. And, the database query compiler would figure out the best ways. And it just led to an explosion in, productivity. And so I think that if we leverage more and more declarative pipelines where developers can tell, computers what tools they want and what characteristics of a build pipeline they want and what security they want, and let the computer worry about what's the best way to achieve that, I think we'll end up with more productivity and more security. So all that said on declarative and the importance of having a bill of software materials, let me now chat about shift left. So I think that one of the trends that we've seen over the past few years, which I think will just continue through 2021 and beyond, is the interest in continuing to release new features faster and securely. And so with regards to speed, microservices have all kinds of advantages. They produce more flexibility. They allow you to launch stuff faster. with this focus on speed, though, if you think about security, security is about getting certain software quality characteristics right. And what we found in the industry is that if you try to follow a traditional, pipeline where you write stories and then you test them and then you release them and you do different kinds of tests, regression tests at one stage, penetration tests at another stage, it just takes time, and you don't want security to slow things down. So one way to achieve that is to take all your security monitoring and your security testing and don't do it at the end, and don't do a penetration test when you think you've got a build that passes the regression test. Do as much security work and monitoring as you can do earlier in the pipeline. Shift it left. Not only will that help you identify problems earlier and solve them earlier, but it will also be more cost effective, because once all the investment has gone in to developing something out to the point that you think it's ready, you release it, and then some bug bounty researcher identifies a vulnerability. The cost to fix that vulnerability is typically like on the order of n squared or worse, right, for in computer science time efficiency parlance. So the more that you can do security monitoring and instrument your pipelines with security tools to catch security problems early, you will not only get better security, but you'll also get better speed.
Excellent. And we could extend that concept to quality as well, right? The testing process, functional testing, smoke regression testing, performance testing, all of that follows the same concept of integrating it into those pipelines.
That is exactly right. Security is just a kind of software quality. So your overall software quality and security will benefit the more that you shift some of these monitoring and tools and checks earlier in the development pipeline.
Thank you so much, Neil. So the last topic I'd like to touch upon is observability. And I want to hear from both of you on that. Tracy, you touched upon it earlier as well. So as you're looking at a plethora of tools, your software delivery ecosystem is a CI/CD tools laden ecosystem, right? There's choice driven by innovation, need, etc. So you have the CI/CD tools, but then you also have other solutions that they have to integrate to, like your ITSM solutions, your code repositories, your collaboration tools, etc. So when you have so many tools that are needed for that end-to-end view and orchestration, how do you get meaningful and actionable intelligence from all of those tools? How do you deal with productivity based on insights that you can gather from them? How do you deal with efficiencies, security, compliance? So love to hear from both of you. Maybe start with you, Neil, since you're on a kind of a role, and talk about your views on observability, and then I'd love to hear from Tracy on the same topic.
Sure. I'd be happy to talk about that. So, the hope is that this new trend of observability will replace the previous approaches of dev test, right? And from a security perspective, there have been a lot of black box approaches to security testing, penetration testing, bug bounties. They're all black box tests. Now there's a bunch of white box tests as well, where you can see things on the inside, but they haven't traditionally been as embedded into development and CI/CD pipelines as they can be, given the kinds of tools that are now available to the market. And so I think that if you instead shift from a mode and a mental model of security testing at various points in the pipeline to security observability as things are getting built, you can benefit. You'll get more security, you'll get more speed, and just the general approach with regards to observability is probably a better approach than approaches of the past.
Thank you, Neil. Tracy, would love to hear from you as well.
So I'm gonna take three concepts and try to pull them together for you. Let's think about a release candidate. That is the farthest left that you start, really. You say, I have a release candidate. In the monolithic world, we had a new executable that the build just created. In the monolithic world, we created an executable and we understood For the most part, if you were doing builds well, you're able to create that bill of material report that showed what was in it. You were able to create difference reports by comparing two BOM reports and showing what's different in that build. That is what I like to call visibility. And it's visibility before you ever deploy. We had a clear understanding of what we were creating. We have a clear understanding of the differences between the two, and we have full knowledge before we ever deploy it how this may act in a runtime environment. Now, in microservices, because we have shifted that all-important link step, not left but to right, we shifted all the way to runtime. We now have this need for observability. But why? The reason why we have the need for it is because we don't have visibility. When you have visibility, observability is important, but not as critical. So think about it this way. You have a release candidate. You figure out what the release candidate's blast radius is, who it's going to impact. And from there, you have an idea of what it might do. Now, what's happening in the industry today, and I've spoken to probably close to 500 individuals over the course of 2020 and asking them about these kinds of problems. And what I hear is SREs lack confidence in deploying microservices because they don't understand the blast radius. And what happens is they deploy it, they get an incident report, and then they use observability to try to figure out what went wrong. That is not the correct use of observability. Observability is useful in an APM perspective to understand latency and transactions, but it should not be used for trying to determine what went wrong before at the deployment step. So we have really a challenge of visibility that's somewhere in the CD pipeline. And that's what I always call automated configuration management. As Neil pointed out, BOM reports are still critical. You have to know what you're delivering. You have to know what its impacts are. And if you know that, you have some visibility. When you have an observability issue, you have an idea of who the usual suspect is. And the usual suspect is always the last change. But how do you see that last change without visibility into what you're doing? So the CI/CD pipelines in a microservice world have to start thinking more about configuration management. We have to get back to our roots and talk about BOM reports, and we have to get back to understanding diff reports. We have to understand blast radiuses, and that will help mitigate and improve the confidence of SREs moving these microservices out to clusters. And remember, observability, while critical for understanding and monitoring a particular cluster, it is at a cluster level. So you could track something at one cluster and it can be totally different from another cluster. Why is that the case? Well, it's because what's running in that cluster is different. What are the differences? So we have to step back and take our giant Death Star and start thinking about how to version that, how to view what we're changing in it, and think about it as a big giant piece of code. And that big giant piece of code has a BOM report, and it has diff reports, and it has impact analysis reports. And I feel like that's where we really need to start sinking our teeth and really understanding what a release candidate means and how it impacts what we're doing moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. So I do have a request. I'd like to come back to both of you for you to articulate your top 2 takeaways for this audience in this topic or related to this topic. So think about that for a minute. I just want to take a couple of minutes to quickly provide an overview of Opsera for a minute or two, and also talk about a couple of upcoming events. So while I do that, think of your top 2 takeaways for this audience, and I'll come right back to you. So I just wanted to share a quick screen to articulate and provide an introduction to Opsera. Opsera provides continuous orchestration across the DevOps ecosystem by maximizing choice and no-code automation. So we have essentially 3 parts to Opsera. There's toolchain automation. It provides a self-service catalog of the most commonly used CI/CD tools, the open source versions of those, or you can add the enterprise versions of those tools. Or you could bring your own tools to that catalog dynamically through a concept called tools registry, and you can provision those tools in a choice of your cloud dynamically through self-serve options. So that's toolchain automation. And then there's declarative pipelines. It's interesting you use the term, Tracy, and no-code and declarative. So we provide a library of pipelines that are drag and drop that can easily be built without writing code or low code across multiple steps, multiple tools, multiple clouds, and you can integrate security and quality into them through a choice of security quality tools, and pipelines can be used for a variety of use cases. And then there's unified insights that provides about 90 plus 85 to 90 KPIs across several dimensions: planning, security, quality, development, and operations. And it can be personalized. You can create dynamic dashboards. You can aggregate logs in one view, so you don't have to go to multiple different consoles and different tools, and build blueprints for audit and compliance. Essentially, Opsera orchestrates tools, pipelines, and insights by maximizing choice and no code. You can sign up for a demo at the opsera.io, opsera.io website. And we have a couple of upcoming events, DevOps Huddle, which is on the Jan 28th. You can look it up in Opsera website, and an upcoming webinar that focuses on a specific type of pipeline. In this case, it's a white box automation of Salesforce release management, which is a type of pipeline that IT is struggling with and wants to automate. So you can sign up for that webinar as well. So I'd like to come back to you, Tracy and Neil, for your top 2 takeaways. Maybe I'll start with Tracy and then go to Neil.
Sure. Well, this is a discussion on predictions, but in order to be able to be predictive, we have to look at our history. Understanding history really does prevent us from making the same mistakes as the past. And while things like Kubernetes and this modern architecture may feel really, really different, it's not. These constructs are all the same. We really need to be sure that we're not throwing away the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, and that we really look at our history and understand what was our North Star, how we kept things in order, what mistakes that we made then, and how do we fix it and we apply it to the future. And then secondly, I really, to really understand microservices and the complexity, really wrap your head around this idea that the link step is done at runtime. And not all microservices are equal. They're all now little tiny applications being deployed independently. And what does that mean? How are you going to adjust what you do in order to really take advantage of it? We're way far now in a distributed kind of microservice environment. We're way far from a monolithic application being pushed through a very static workflow. How can we take a microservice, understand what it needs, and really push it through a declarative pipeline that gets it out to our end users, so that we can achieve the business agility that it has promised? We have to solve that problem.
Thank you, Tracy. And Neil, your top 2 takeaways, please.
Great. Thanks, Chandra. So in my top 2 takeaways, and the first one, I'll also just reemphasize what Tracy mentioned about about understanding the lessons of the past. I think George Santana is a Spanish philosopher. He basically said that those that don't understand history are doomed to repeat it, which is, by the way, one of the key reasons that felt it was important to write this book on big breaches, so that we can learn from the lessons of the past. And I think at the end of the day, microservices are just software. And in a previous book that I wrote, 12 plus years ago, back when I was at Google, entitled Foundations of Security, basically in that book, I outlined 7 key security goals: authentication, authorization, auditability, and 4 others. And so all those goals are still the same. How we achieve them in a microservice world might need to be a little bit different, but we still need to achieve those goals. So I'd say that, takeaway number 1, there's a saying in computer science that everything old always becomes new again, and I'd say that is true with microservices. Let's not forget everything that we learned about achieving security in software just because there's a new way to do it through microservices. I'd say that's takeaway number 1. And takeaway number 2. Looking forward, I think that given all of the advancements and insights, I think the hope here is that it should be, through shifting left and observability and all these things, it should be possible to achieve software that's higher quality in general and higher security than in the past if we're ready to adopt next generation tools in order to help us get there. So that's my second takeaway.
Excellent insights from both of you. I think we have a couple of questions as well, which we'll get to before we wrap. I just wanted to quickly give a summary of our recap of our discussion. We've covered a lot of different topics. We started off by talking about multi-cloud adoption kind of being the way to go, and it's being accelerated by COVID, by remote work, the importance of adopting new technologies in a multi-cloud driven ecosystem to go cloud native, and the importance of microservices in that ecosystem. How do you secure those microservices? And then basically also to look at in a choice of tools, choice of cloud ecosystem, how do you orchestrate DevOps declaratively with no code, low code? And when you do that, how do you shift left security and quality into that kind of an orchestration, declarative orchestration? And finally, how do you declaratively orchestrate them for different use cases? And then last but not least, how do you get observability on top of that, right? And the importance of observability as well. So it was a very insightful discussion, Tracy and Neil. It was my honor and pleasure to have you here. I believe before we wrap, we may have a couple of questions that we can quickly go over. Sushmita, if you're able to bring up the questions, or I can try and read them here. So there's one question from one of the participants. Please recommend, given multiple cloud providers providing similar services, how to make a rational choice, which one to pick to solve for a business problem. Do one of you want to take that one?
I'd be happy to take that. So the first thing that I'll mention is that, the different multiple cloud offerings may offer, a whole bunch of services. So AWS may offer their key management service. Microsoft Azure may offer a different version of that. Other cloud providers may offer a different version of that. I'd say that, with regards to the goal of multi-cloud, if you want to have flexibility and agility going forward and the ability to switch clouds, I wouldn't look at the question as figuring out which of their tools to choose, right? But maybe rather figure out how you build things in a way so that you don't have to choose a particular tool that a cloud provider gives you, so that you can avoid the problem of being locked into any one cloud provider. So I would just suggest to see if you can build a layer that'll abstract away the details and the particular features of any cloud offering, and allow you to truly be multi-cloud and switch between clouds if you ever need to.
Excellent feedback. So to become tool and cloud agnostic, so you can leverage the flexibility of clouds, the best practices across clouds, and even not be locked in and get into a situation where cost becomes a problem, right? Excellent feedback. Thank you, Neil. Tracy, did you want to add anything to that? There's one more question. I can pass the other question to you, perhaps.
Well, I just want to say that I think that everything that Neil just said is spot on. You really want to be agnostic, but this is a relationship you're building. If you're gonna use a provider, who's going to be able to who fits best into your culture? You're bringing this organization in as a primary part of your team, and relationships and how they build relationships and how they provide you service is going to be a critical part of that.
So I couldn't help but notice you mentioned culture, and that happens to be the next question someone asked us. With the multi-cloud and microservices adoption, what is your guidance to companies on the path of adopting and changing their DevOps culture and practices? So since you brought that up, I'll lob this one to you as well.
To me or to Neil?
Go ahead, Tracy. You can start.
That is a loaded question, okay? That is a big time loaded question. It has so many different aspects to it. So I'll just give you some really basic stuff to chew on. First of all, start really understanding domain-driven design. If you're really moving into a Kubernetes microservice environment and you're really re-architecting, understand the importance of a domain-driven design. Understand how important it is to be able to start creating microservices that fit into particular solution spaces. There's quite a bit to learn about decoupling applications and moving into that. And why I say a domain-driven design around the question of culture is because we are moving from a me only or my application team only to a platform that is completely a shareable platform. We have to learn to share our toys, and we have to learn not to have a kitchen junk drawer that we throw everything in and assume somebody's going to find it. And if you're the person writing it and you have a team of 10 people, they may know what's there, but that is not solving the problem, and that's actually causing more problems because it's creating sprawl. So start understanding domain-driven design. Start understanding how your organizational silos work, and how those silos really are solving for particular problems areas, and how those problem areas relate back.
Absolutely. I would just add a small aspect from my perspective, is also process. People and process ultimately translate to how you look at the workflows between them, the collaboration between them, and how technology addresses that, right? So understanding, for example, in a pipeline, automated pipeline, you have engineers, you have security engineers, you have quality engineers, and then operations, all of them somehow integrating in that chain. So how can they all work together with their pieces being integrated declaratively? Comes down to them having a workflow and a process of them working together, and then having the technology automating it. There are a couple of more questions. One to Neil. I think you know this in your sleep. What are the key metrics to measure security in the DevOps context?
That's a good question. There's actually many metrics that you can choose from, with regards to measuring in a DevOps context. What I'd encourage folks to do is, in a DevOps context, the more that you can instrument your development pipeline with static analysis and vulnerability scanning and a number of other aspects, I would look at the number of critical vulnerabilities that are coming up in different phases of the pipeline. And ideally, you should not release any piece of software that has a critical vulnerability that's CVSS 8 or above, in which remote code execution could be possible. So I'd say that one metric to look at is just the number of critical vulnerabilities for your definition of critical. I'd suggest CVSS 8 and above, and track that as you're going along, and I ideally reduce that to 0 before you release, because the second that you do release, the attackers are certainly going to probe. So it's better that you get that fixed, before you launch. That said, there's a whole bunch of other such metrics. One of the things that I do in one of the chapters of the book is for each of the root causes of breach, including software vulnerabilities, we suggest a bunch of candidate metrics. So I'd say that that's the next place to go, and then beyond that, if you look at the CIS benchmarks, they've defined like literally hundreds of metrics, but you got to choose the probably 3 to 5 ones that matter the most for your organization. And I think in the Big Breaches book, in that relevant chapter, we tried to suggest the 3 to 5 metrics that matter the most to like 80% of organizations.
Excellent. So I'll also say who asked this question to get a copy of the Big Breaches book, where you can get those metrics. And one way to get that book is to sign up for a demo of Opsera, so you can get a free copy of that book as well. So we have time for one last question. And Tracy, we'll have this end with you. Please provide some guidance on starting a new SRE team.
Let me pass that off. I'm going to add this to the, can everybody see my, I'm going to share a video. So we did a meetup sometime last year on this topic. The CD Foundation did, because it is a common question that we get. And we brought somebody in who managed a really big team, and I'm going to put the meetup link there in the chat. I don't know if everybody can see that. No, I think I just sent it to
We can send it. Sushmita can help send it to all participants as well. That'll be
because
awesome.
That is a great question. We do get tons of that question comes up to the CD Foundation often. The presentation was really, really in depth in how she built out a large SRE team and some of the goals that she wanted to achieve. And so I would say watch that video because I can't answer it as well as she did, and it's a really, really valid question.
Excellent. Thank you. So we have one final poll before we wrap. Sushmita, do you want to kick that off? And then we can wrap up the webinar. Which of these might be a focus for you in 2021? Shift left in security and quality, move to cloud, microservices or containers, more automation, visibility of DevOps, all of the above. 57% all of the above. And about 20% each focused on visibility, automation, cloud, and shift left is in security is about 7%. So we've got to get them to read your book, Neil. So we'll
but keep in mind, those folks that said all of the above
yes.
include the shift left. So it's actually 64%. But
absolutely.
But I think the more people that can benefit from the book, the better.
Absolutely. So please go to opsera.io. We have a couple more such webinars coming up. I'm sure you'll, if you like this one, you might benefit from some other different conversations. Neil and Tracy, it's been my honor and privilege to have you here. And it's been an insightful discussion. Would love to do it again with you. I've learned a lot as well in this conversation. And thank you for your time and your insights today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks all. Bye-bye.